Thank you, Dr. Ryu. And good morning. No response? Okay, I'm an economist by training, so I know you don't like economics. But today, my presentation is mostly economics, but more policy-oriented, maybe stories. So maybe you can enjoy, some of the understanding of Korean economy in terms of international trade. Before I start, I will talk to you like Korea really make economic development. You can see Korea as of today. This is because of our international trade. Really, we were a very poor country, but we transformed my country into not quite yet, most advanced economy, but maybe middle power economy. Main, contribution factor was international trade. So today, I would like to discuss with you mainly two parts. One is how Korea is doing trade. In other words, in terms of our performance, in terms of our trading partners with whom we are trading, those kind of trade aspect of the Korean economy, we will study that in the first maybe half, and the second half I will talk about more on trade policy evolution from long time ago to today. And then maybe we will have some time for interactive discussions. You can ask some questions. Okay, let me turn to the first page. Yesterday or something, yesterday North Korea also shoot the missiles. So we are still in a kind of, it's not actual war, but war kind of framework. We had a Korean War in early 1950s, before you were born, maybe before your parents were born, right? But I'm old enough. I was born in 1952, during the Korean War. My family used to live in Seoul, but we all went down to Busan. Busan is the most southern part of Korean Peninsula, except Jeju Island. But in any case, our family went down there, and I was fortunate enough to be born during that time. And since my birthplace is Busan, I become a person from Busan. I'm not living in Busan. My hometown is Gyeonggi Province. But these days, I cannot claim that because all the documents ask where you were born. I was born in Busan. I don't know whether you like baseball or Korean baseball. We have a baseball team of Busan. We call a giant. Without any kind of hesitation, I'm rooting for Busan because I was born in Busan. Anyway, so Korean War broke in 1950. It lasted 3 years. And then Korea was divided, right? North and South. And if you look at the South, at that time, northern part of the Korean Peninsula was more industrial area. Okay, they can produce industrial goods, and also they can produce lots of natural resources. So very rich in that kind of context. But southern part is mostly agricultural area, rural area. And you go to Gangnam area, very fancy area these days. But in the even until the 1970s, there was all the area was rice paddy. Lots of the dirt, mud and dirt, that kind of stuff. No buildings at all. So we are divided, but southern part is mostly agricultural sector, but we have more population. Right now, the population ratio is almost 1:2. But even at that time, South Korea has more population. So big population, only land, rice growing land, no industrial base, no natural resources. We were very, very poor, okay, at that time. And so what do? we heavily depend on international aid. After the war, many advanced countries are giving some aid to Korea. So, major part of Korean GDP at that time is from aid. And according to many documents, Korea was one of the poorest country in Asia, because we are not including Africa at the time. In Asia, Korea was one of the most poor, country. And per capita GDP, even a long time ago, is $80. In other words, per month, $7. So we are that poor. But one thing I want to tell you is this. I took a sabbatical year from my university in 2004. I went to the World Bank, which is in Washington, D.C. I was a visiting scholar. Every year in Washington, every other year in Washington, IMF, World Bank is holding annual conference, which means that they are inviting all the central bank governors, financial institutions, president, all the financial people coming to Washington. Maybe October. 1 year they are holding this in Washington. Another year they are holding the same annual meeting outside Washington. In any case, in October I was sitting in the World Bank office. Somebody sent me a kind of a speech text, which was made by Deputy Managing Director of IMF. At the time, the Deputy Managing Director is a professor, used to be professor at University of Minnesota, the lady professor, Ann Kruger, very famous development economist. He liked Korea very much too. And he gave a speech before the governors from African countries, maybe 30 governors. She was describing a country which was so poor, even they don't have any hope for future. No resources, no industrial base. These African governors look to each other. Is she talking about my country or your country? But actually, she was describing the case of Korea in the 50s and 60s. And also, she told us, according to the documents released by State Department of United States in the 1950s, they are asking the government, the documents saying, Korea is so poor, there's no hope for future. So why don't we reduce our size of grant, which is given to Korea? And rather, we want to use this money for other countries, which may be having some hope for future development. So we are in that kind of poor situation. So to describe the whole stories, let me show you this picture. This is, you go to city hall area, we call Cheonggyecheon River. This is the river. You see this today. This is 1950s, late 1950s. Actually, this is a house along the stream, very poorly situated, and the people live there. And after 1960s, after President Park Chung-hee came in, they cover this whole small river by cement, and we make a highway, those kind of things. Later, the city mayor, former President Lee Myung-bak, he was a Seoul city mayor. He discard all the kind of cements, and they make a beautiful stream. But anyway, this is a picture. I show many pictures to foreign students, foreign professors, foreign government officials. They saw many pictures, but this is a picture they think this is most impressive. I mean, this is a picture Korea was in 1950s. Let me show you Korean economy in 2016. Population slightly over 5 million people. This is a 0.7% of the world population. Normally World Bank and other international organizations called Korean economic development as a miracle of Han River. We have a river, big river, so they are calling it miracle of Han River. But those people who are studying Korean wave, Korean culture, Korean music, they are talking about miracle of 0.7%. Not miracle of Han River, miracle of 0.7. We are small population, where we are quite influential, to the young society, young community in the world. In any case, North Korea is only half of South Korea, 25 million, and our GDP slightly over $1 trillion. But this is very important. $1.4 trillion of GDP, which is 1.8% of the world GDP. 1.8%. This is a key factor why Korea is trying to export more, try to connect our economy into the rest of the world. This is a key factor because we are small. We want to be with the 50 million population. We cannot develop out of only own domestic market. We have to connect it. We have to be connected with the rest of the world. And per capita GDP, $27,000, but we are struggling actually. Somewhere $20,000, it lasted more than 20 years. Okay, we cannot really jump to the $35,000 or $40,000 anymore. Very, very difficult. We achieve huge development, but after 20,000, 22, 23, depends on the exchange rate values, it is awfully difficult to go into the real advanced country level. But still, among many countries with that kind of population size, there are only 2 or 3 candidates which can actually enter into real advanced countries. Like Taiwan is one of the candidates, and Korea is also one of the candidates. Other than that, many countries, developing countries, are struggling in terms of enhancing their per capita income. And our trade, all the statistics is 2016, but the trade, Korean statistics I can update, but the world statistics is not yet available, so it's 2015, but it's $1 trillion. So look at the size of the GDP and size of the Korean trade, similar to each other. Not quite the same, but similar to each other. And our trade is 2.9% of the world trade volume. So we are doing much better than our GDP. So this is our summary of the today's Korean economy, snapshot of the Korean economy. Let me show you. This is the beautiful Cheonggae stream area. You can see today. You saw the 50 years ago, 60 years ago how poor this area was. So this is one comparison you can have. Korea in the past and Korea now. Okay, so these are the topics. After 1 hour, we'll have a break, so you can have some kind of breathing space between our lectures and discussion. Trade performance, trade relations with other partners, and then evolution of Korea's trade policy, and current state of Korea's FTA, implications of Korea's FTA network, and Korea's prospective trade policy. Maybe half of the topics we will do, and then after the break, remaining half, okay? So, Korea's trade performance. I can go back to 1980s and 1990s, but you can see the gray bar is a total trade. It is increasing all the way from 60s, 70s, 80s. So 2008, our experts are getting together, and we have to celebrate. Maybe next year, we'll have a record year of our trade reaching to $1 trillion, given the speed of our increase. But you all know that very well. Economists is very weak in prediction. If you forecast by economists, it doesn't really right, all the time. So we make a huge mistake in terms of predicting our trade volume, because 2008, you remember what happened to the world economy? Big financial crisis. happened from United States, right? So 2008, we have a big crisis. Naturally, 2009, all the trade volume plunged, okay? World trade volume plunged by 20%, and Korea was not an exception. So 2009, almost, like $800 billion, $850 billion, we are reaching to the $1 trillion. It plunged to $600 billion, about 20% decrease in 2009. And luckily, after 2009, world economy started to recover a little bit. And especially, I don't know why, trade recovered quite quickly. 2009 and 2010, world trade picked up, and Korea was doing very, very well. So 2009, 2010, and finally 2011. I don't like this factor, but Korea is a country, we calculate daily trade volume through the customs office. We are pretty good because we have a very advanced IT systems. Every day, how much we are exporting, how much we are importing, it's like a preliminary estimate, but still we are doing that. And according to the government, December 5th of 2011, our import plus export just reached $1 trillion. So we make that day as a trade day. We are celebrating trade day. And this year, 2016, December 5th, we will have another trade day celebration. But anyway, as I said, 2009 plunge, and 2010 and 11, it's okay. 2011 through 2014, $1 trillion status was maintained. 2015 and 16, it go below $1 trillion. And like 2016, very poor. But luckily, coming into this year, our officials are estimating we are reaching back to the $1 trillion because world economy is recovering. Then that means Korea can do much better. Trade is increasing by more than 15 or 20%. So it's a good sign. But quality of trade, in other words, these exports are mainly by big companies for small items, semiconductors, automobile. So small and medium-sized companies are not doing very well, but our big companies are doing very, very good. And our trade is led by that big companies. So in other words, plunge, growing, and then very impressive $1 trillion trade, and then decrease again below $1 trillion level, and then luckily 2017 it is supposed to be hitting another $1 trillion mark. I'm sure it will, but but we can see later when the data are out. Okay, so I already told you. However, I want to tell you one thing here. $1 trillion trade country means there are only 9 countries in the world which is doing trade more than $1 trillion a year. Starting with China. China is the #1 largest trading nation is China. And then United States, and then maybe Germany, Japan, Netherlands, and Italy, France, UK. You can name advanced countries, and then Korea, 9th largest trading nation. But in terms of export performance, we are actually number 6 in the world. So counting the individual countries, EU is a collection of countries, but counting the individual countries, even Korea's export performance is ranked at number 6 in the world. Very impressive, very small country, and you saw very poor situation in the 60s. And these stories I already told you. I mean, we reached the $1 trillion, and then going back below $1 trillion, and then this year we may come back to over $1 trillion trading nation. Okay, Next thing is with whom we are trading with. So here our major 4 or 5 partners are here, which is US, China, Japan, EU. Later I will explain our trade with ASEAN. ASEAN is ASEAN 10 countries, right? Here 3 advanced countries and China. The rest of them is, including ASEAN, mostly developing countries, okay? So look at this diagram here. United States, this is year 2000. But if you go back to mid-1980s, our trade with the United States is almost 40% out of our total trade, 40%. So our major trading partner used to be United States. But that almost 40% is every year is decreasing, and then 20% in 2000, and then 2005, almost 12%, and then 2010, slightly below 10%, okay? Right now, 2016 is slightly above the 10%. In other words, our trade with, relatively speaking, our trade with the United States has been declining all the way since mid-1980s. What about our trade with Japan? Japan also, it is decreasing in terms of relative percentages. What about with the EU? Not impressive, almost 10%, 9%, those kind of things. The reason is EU 28 countries, maybe sooner or later it will be 27 countries, but 28 countries, they are trading to each other. EU are not, is not trading with outside the region. They are trading, but mostly concentrated within EU area. That's why we are not doing big trade with EU. But if you combine the EU economy's GDP, it's a huge economies. It's larger than the United States. So from the Korean government policymakers' viewpoint, it is important market. Most advanced, very, very big country. So we are paying much attention to our trade with the EU. But in any case, at the moment, almost 10%, Japan less than 10%, the United States slightly more than 10%. But what about China? We had a diplomatic normalization with China in 1992. Since then, it's all the way up to today. It's more than almost 25% of our trade is with China. So if you combine all this together, major countries, it's about 50 or 55%. Rest of them, we are doing it with the developing countries. But the point I want to make here is this. Our trade, relatively speaking, with United States has been declining. And we are not doing very well with the EU either. For Japan, I will tell you a little bit later the story, our relationship with Japan. China is okay, it's increasing. But if you look at as a policymaker or trade economist, if you look at the declining trend of Korea's trade with United States and EU, what kind of thinking you are having? I mean, is it okay because we have another market like China or other developing country? Or you may feel like, it's not very good sign because not just market size, but the United States is the biggest market in the world, but US is most advanced country in the world. If you are losing your market share or your competitiveness in the US market, that means your future status of your economy or your products are not very bright, right? So you must do pretty good or even maintain the market share in the United States, not declining. So US policy, Korean policymakers and also like economists like me, we are strongly suggesting to the government, we have to do something about declining trend of our trade with the United States. It has to be reversed. Otherwise, our future performance of our products or firms are not very bright. And also we want to emphasize that our trade with EU should be also emphasized. So this is maybe background why Korea decided to have an FTA with the United States. So there are many other reasons, but simply speaking, declining trend is not a good sign for the future status of Korean products. So maybe that was one of the main reasons why Korean government was considering having FTA with the United States. In any case, these are the situation. Okay, that's how we 50% with our major trading nations, another 50% rest of the world. Okay. So let's look at our trade with the major trading partners. United States, impressive growth, but relatively speaking, the trade was declining. As of 2016, we have a trade surplus against the United States, slightly over $20 billion. You know why Trump is complaining, right? Korea is one of them. I told you Korea's performance was declining all the time, up until 2010. Let's look at this picture here. This is a so-called trade intensity index. It sounds very technical, but this index means the index is above, bigger than 1, that means Korea is doing better than world average. If this index number is less than 1, then means Korea is not doing as well as the rest of the world. So early part, even 2001, 2003, all the figures are above 1. This blue one is export intensity. It is above 1.2 means we are doing 20% better than rest of the world in terms of our export to United States. But 2005, it became below 1. And then all the way up to 2011, if this figure is this index like a 0.85, that means we are doing 50% less or weaker performance than the rest of the world. So it is not good. So that's why we have a negotiation with the United States, and our FTA start to be implemented as of March the 15th. Of 2012. When I was a trade minister, I actually finished the last part of the negotiation, not the whole negotiation. So after that, okay. This is, look at this. All the indexes are now moving upward, right? It's not that impressive, but the trend is reversed, and we say that this is because of the Korea-US FTA. We are having some difficulties right now because President Trump wants to renegotiate Korea-US FTA. If US is not satisfied, he said that I want to cancel discard the FTA. I don't know whether he really do it or not, but he's doing it, that kind of stuff with the NAFTA, which is North American Free Trade Area, and also Korea-US FTA. But anyway, this is Korea-US trade relations. What about Korea-EU? I told you we are not very impressive in terms of our performance with the EU, but after Korea-EU FTA negotiations started later than Korea-US FTA. But, ratification, all kind of process is much faster than Korea-US FTA. So it started on July 1st, 2011, like almost 9 months or 10 months before Korea-US FTA started. So look at this. Here it's above 1, but recently all the figures are less than 1. But again, after 2011, it is picking up. So we kind of evaluate this kind of phenomena as a success out of our FTA with the EU. Okay, Korea, Japan, we are having the total volume is not very impressive, but we are having $23 billion deficit against Japan. But if you see the next line, we never have any single year we have a trade surplus with Japan since 1960s. So always, every year, it used to be more than $35 billion. Is decreased a little bit, but we are still heavily depend on Japanese economy. Maybe historically, Japan occupied Korea for 36 years, So our senior business people are close to Japanese colleagues, counterparts. So we are heavily dependent on still capital goods, components, very high tech materials. We are still dependent upon because our technology is not yet fully catching up with Japanese technology. We have to. So every item, automobile, smartphones, every item we have some parts which are imported from Japan because it's essential parts. So we are having huge deficit. What about our export to China, Japan? Not very well. We are not selling cars to Japan. Japan is producing, very nice cars, so they are not importing any cars from Korea. Even smartphones, we cannot sell there because they have their own smartphone system. They like their products very much, not because of patriotism or because of nationalistic view, but they believe the item Japan produces are the best. I mean, to some extent we can understand that, but they are not really diversify their consumption products. So we are not doing very, very well in Japanese market, but Korea is not the only one. Major countries like the United States still having difficulties in selling goods to Japan. Okay, what about Korea-China? This is the most impressive performance. I mean, among all the pair countries in the world, we started trade heavily in 1992. The volume was only $6 billion. And 2016, 211, and 2015 is even bigger. Almost 37 times, 35 times, 34 times increase over 20-year period. Very, very impressive. And why is that so? We are close to each other. Our industrial development status are quite complementary. And we are having $30.5 billion trade surplus. How about if Chinese officials know this kind of figure, are they happy or not happy? They are not happy. They are having $35 billion deficit against Korea, but they cannot complain this very much because China has having more than $50 billion of trade surplus against the United States. $350 billion trade surplus. So that's the situation. In any case, but why Korea succeed? I mean, Korea is a very unique country among major trading nations which is having trade surplus against China. All other countries are having deficits. Why is that so? The key reason is this. There are many, many Korean companies operating in China. Since 1992, China is starting to open. And at that time, Chinese wage is really, really low. Very cheap Chinese laborers. So many Korean companies, as far as I'm concerned, this is not rough, it's not correct figure, but I gathered this kind of information in 2012. More than 25,000 companies are operating in China, from small company to Samsung or LG. Most of them went there to utilize Chinese laborers. They are not thinking about Chinese market. Okay, China has been world factory, so-called. They are producing everything, right? But by their own firms, but mainly by foreign firms. These foreign firms, including Korean firms, they cannot produce everything in China. They are mainly using Chinese labor. But the parts and components, capital goods, where do they import? Their own home countries. So 25,000 Korean firms are making some goods in China, but most of the parts, components, capital goods, they are importing from their parent company in Korea. So in fact, Korea-China trade was inter-firm trade, inter-Korean firm trade. Okay? Once they import parts and components using Chinese labor, assemble and make the goods, what do they do with these goods? Mostly they sell outside China. So that's the kind of typical pattern. That's why we have a huge surplus, because Korean parent company are exporting to their subsidiaries in China. That's the surplus. We are not earning money by selling goods to Chinese market. Not many companies. The only thing is we are giving some wages to Chinese labor. So huge surplus is not coming from Chinese domestic market. It's coming from world market. Simply, we are having huge surplus with China because we have our subsidiaries. Many subsidiaries are there. They are importing things from Korea. So the trade concept of Korea-China trade has been a little bit distorted. We are not really trading with China. We are trading with Korean firms in China. But now China, I said per capita income, roughly speaking, $80,000, $8,000. What about Vietnam? $2,700. So Chinese labor cost is 3 times more expensive than Vietnam. Then what do you think? Many companies are now leaving China, going to Vietnam or Indonesia, seeking for low wages. And China is also changing a lot too. They don't want to import parts and components from other countries. They want to rather produce domestically. So that kind of thing is happening. But anyway, this is the last thing here. Korean firms in China have focused on so-called processing trade or assembly trade rather than focusing on Chinese domestic market. But now Chinese leadership changing the focus of their policy. We are expanding our domestic market. We are developing the inland, very poorly developed region of China. We are focusing more on that. We are not giving incentives for foreign firms who are producing goods and export to outside the world. So policy is changing. That's the kind of situation. And one more, our partner is ASEAN, I told you. ASEAN 10 countries. The total ASEAN countries' GDP is slightly over 2.5 times of Korean GDP. It's not a big, 10 countries, huge population, but economy is not very big, but still our trade is in 2016, $118 billion. Our trade with 10 countries is bigger than Korea-US trade, bigger than Korea-EU trade, bigger than Korea-Japan trade. So we are having huge trade activities between Korea and ASEAN. We are quite complementary because ASEAN's more resources, more agricultural-based economy. We are more manufacturing, industrial-based economy. So we are changing our trade very much. And also, one more thing is, because of wage increase in China, Korean companies are now moving to ASEAN countries. Then trade will be picking up because, again, we have a trade between parent companies and subsidiaries. For example, in Vietnam, Hanoi, I actually visit that company. Samsung has a huge assembly company in Vietnam. All the Galaxy phones, notes, and everything which is starting with the Galaxy by Samsung are assembled in Hanoi, Vietnam. They hire 65,000 young lady workers out of high school. They are assembling these kind of things. So our trade with ASEAN is very healthy, and that's why our president went to Philippines and Vietnam, and we have a good meeting saying that our trade with the ASEAN will be on par of our trade with the US and EU. We are really paying more attention to our trade with ASEAN. Okay, then what about the rest of the area we are trading with? Of course, the Middle East. It used to be, this green bar used to be huge because we are importing a lot from oil, a lot from Middle East. 100% of oil, almost 100% we are importing from Middle East. But oil price become very cheap. That's why we are getting much more benefits because our import is decreasing. But anyway, We are still importing a lot from Middle East, but in terms of our export, the blue color, we are not doing very well. ASEAN already talked about that. And Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, many important countries, but our trade with this Latin America is not very impressive. I heard yesterday, Korean government is considering. They have been discussing this for a long time with Mercosur, which is Brazil, Argentina, and other countries. They are soon starting the negotiation of FTA. Then maybe we can expand our trade with Latin America. Russia, powerful country, very big country. We are not doing very much of trade. And India, we have a FTA with India, but the size, total trade is less than $20 billion, very small. And what about Africa? Of course, we are not doing very well. So Korean companies are concentrating on major partners. And the rest of them, they are doing some, but not very impressively. So all in all, the implication by looking at our trade relations, I already told you the idea. Why did you have a Korea-EU FTA, Korea-US FTA? The Korean government never say, why we are doing this. But my interpretation as an economist, and later I joined the government, and I make, I emphasize this factor very much. If you lose your market share in the US and EU, that means you will not be doing very well in the future, because your products, your exports are soon caught up by other countries, because your goods are not very impressive in terms of technology or innovation, things like that. So we must make our extra effort to increase or still, at least maintain our performance in the advanced countries like United States and EU. So here I said our motivation is to maintain or improve our competitive edge of Korean products in the advanced market, such as US and EU. Korea needed definitely FTA with the United States and EU. Okay, we had a negotiation with the United States almost 2 years, 2005 until 2007. So June the 30th, everything is concluded. And then actual implementation started March the 15th, 2012. In other words, it took 5 years to start implementation. Why? Because both countries had some problems. United States, at the time, President Obama doesn't like the whole, he liked whole Korea-US FTA, but he doesn't like the one section on automobile. He doesn't like it very much. So we have a little revision. So it takes some time. And then Korean people, agricultural people, and some politicians, they don't like a Korea-US FTA. Definitely in the Korean society, we have a certain segment of the society which maintains strong anti-American sentiment. Not only economics, but the whole, everything, every aspect. So they are opposing the Korea-US FTA. And then National Assembly is strongly opposing in terms of ratification. It took almost 5 years, but finally it passed, the whole thing. But after 5 years, we are doing pretty well with the US. In other words, we are having surplus. But at the same time, we are having deficits with the EU. But Korea-US FTA, Korea-EU FTA is most advanced FTA maybe in the world. It's almost similar in terms of quality. But one FTA with EU, we are having deficit. One FTA with the United States, we are having surplus. How do you interpret? Economists saying FTA is just arrangement, okay? The outcome, in other words, trade deficit or trade surplus, is outcome of how you use this FTA, okay? So most, critically, economists saying FTA is a system. main factor which is influencing surplus or deficit is more like a macroeconomic phenomena. In other words, if the US economy is doing good means you are consuming more. You are definitely importing more from Korea. Korean economy for last 3 or 4 years, our growth rate is almost 1%, not over 2%. We are not doing very well. We are in deep recession. In other words, we are not importing very much from United States. So that's the result. We are having surplus, not because we are exporting more and we are importing less, but because we are importing less because we are in recession. And US is picking up their own economy. They are importing more from us. And maybe vice versa for Korea-EU FTA. So we argue more macroeconomic situation of member countries are deciding factor in terms of whether you have surplus or deficit. But that kind of argument is not eligible to President Trump. He's not listening to that kind of stuff. We have a deficit. We have to get rid of these deficits, okay? And right now, I told you China has huge deficits. Think about 2015. I don't know whether you can imagine how big this number is. 2015, United States had the trade deficits of $730 billion. 730, almost $1 trillion of trade deficits. Huge, Our GDP is $1.4 trillion, but US trade deficit is $730 billion. The next year, 2016, it become $500 billion, a huge deficit. Out of that deficit, China is half of them. In other words, China was having trade surplus against the United States, $370 billion. And next group is $60 billion surplus against the United States, which is Germany and Japan and Mexico. And then, $20 billion like Korea, Taiwan. But in other words, China and then Germany, Japan, and Mexico are having huge trade surplus against the United States. That's why U.S. is picking up those countries, but U.S. is asking Germany a little bit too, but not much against Germany. But they are picking up China, and then Japan, and then Mexico. And Mexico and Korea, they had the FTA. So those two countries are picked up by Trump, and then we want to renegotiate the FTAs because President Trump thinks that this FTA is tilted in favor of Korea. But I don't buy this, but still that's the argument. That's why we are having some negotiation on amendment, but we cannot predict what will happen to this kind of renegotiations. This is difficult, politically sensitive, okay? But in other words, in any case, we are doing that kind of stuff. What about China? Actually, I started launching the FTA negotiation with China, which was 2012, May the 2nd. For several years before 2012, China really asked Korea to start the FTA negotiations. I think China was thinking that maybe Korea is having FTA negotiation with China, with the United States, which is really their concern. So China really want to have FTA with Korea. I actually followed the summit meeting, the president, January 2012 to Beijing, and I see the Premier Hu Jintao and Prime Minister Wen Jiabao separately asking our president, we should start our negotiations as soon as possible. But it took many, many years, and then we started our negotiation on 2012. It ended and then started to be implemented 2015, December, soon, December 20th. when I start, Korea-China FTA negotiations, I told you now we need this FTA because we now, we should target the Chinese domestic market, not processing trade. We have to sell goods to Chinese consumers. To overcome trade barriers of China, we need a FTA which can dismantle barriers. So that's why we started. Our plan is quite technical, but let me just give you the some kind of criteria. If you can evaluate one FTA, the best FTA is 100 points. If I give 100 points for certain FTA, perfect FTA in terms of liberalization, which means that WTO is recommending within 10-year period, you dismantle every tariff on every good within 10 years. Okay? Some goods you are eliminating tariff right away, some goods over 10-year period. So if you do that, 100%. But Korea, US, Korea, EU, after 10 years, the score is 97.5%. In other words, 2.5%, we allow some exceptions because of both countries have sensitive items, especially Korea. We have sensitive items like rice and some agricultural products. That's the kind of high quality FTA. So when we start Korea-China FTA, we thought maybe China is different and also a difficult country to open up. So why don't we say our target is 90%, 90 points. That's our plan. And at the minimum, 85%. That's our plan. But our team stepped down as, when the new government came in 2013. So later, 2 years later, it is concluded. And the outcome was revealed. The score was 66.2 points. It's much lower than we expected. So that's why the international community doesn't consider Korea-China FTA as a threat. Okay? Still, it's good, but it's not high level. But in any case, we needed Korea-China FTA because we want to penetrate into Chinese domestic market. Very important. Look at the world. Who is growing? Now, United States total GDP is $17 trillion, roughly speaking. China, $10 trillion. So US is number one, and number two is China. $10 trillion economy. Korea is $1.4 trillion. So 7 times bigger than Korean economy. It is growing still at the rate of 6.5%, which means domestic markets are growing. And China is very close to Korea. And why not? We are having FTA. We have to concentrate on selling goods, not producing goods in China, selling goods to China. So that's why we needed to have an FTA with China. But the quality is impressive, but still it's good to have Korea-China FTA. And the third one is, what about the rest of the region in the world, like Latin America, Russia, Africa? I think Korean companies are still very dynamic and active. So maybe companies will expand their trade activities into that kind of areas in the future. So I said this is a great potential for Korean companies later. They can export these things to other countries. So the first part I want to conclude in a minute, and then you can have a rest. Let me tell you one story about some report produced by ASEAN Development Bank, we call ADB, which is located in Manila, Philippines. Several years ago, that organization produced a report. It's a little bit outdated, but still has some good implication, called Asia 2050. Asia 2050, future, kind of prediction. Many, scenarios. But the key aspect of their report is this: by the time of 2050, which is quite a long time later, they are estimating the population of Asia, broad Asia, including every countries, those groups who are entering into, newly entering into so-called middle income classes. Middle income classes means what? Annual GDP is 8,000 to 10,000, that kind of stuff. So you are a poor country, but you are entering newly into middle income classes. That population alone, by 2050 in Asia, is 3 billion people. 3 billion people in Asia. Of course, Japan, Korea, China already entering into aging population kind of society, but other parts of the Asia, like ASEAN, Pakistan, India, all other countries, they are growing rapidly in terms of their own population, and they are making economic development. So $3 billion people are entering into middle income class. If you become a middle income class out of very poor situation, what do you want to do using more money? You want to purchase some good things, right? Typically what? Typically, refrigerator, nice smart TV, smartphone, small size, automobile, and washing machines, all kind of things you want to buy. And that's the characteristic of middle income class demand, right? And this report says, without much reason, Korea by 2050, Korea will be second largest per capita income country below United States. So I was surprised. I asked the reporters, there's scenarios, good scenario, middle scenario, poor scenario, but best scenario, he said that Korea will be number 2 in the world right after the United States, having more than $100,000 of per capita income. So I asked, did you consider unification? Did you consider, many questions? No, we don't consider that. What do they consider is the size of middle income population. We are entering into the new middle income class, 3 billion people. What do they want to buy? Those items you are describing are best produced by Korean companies. Samsung, LG, Hyundai. So simply maybe these companies will be disappeared. We don't know. But if they succeed, necessarily produce these goods in Korea. They can produce in India, other countries are using cheap labors. But anyway, those names are quite impressive. That's why they give a huge credit to the Korean future economy. I don't buy this, but that's the situation. So the remaining area, we can do better in the future. Right now, they are more concentrated on major trading partners, but in the future, they have a good potential to expand their trade activities in the future. Okay, let's take a break and then come back.